Today we're going to take advantage of the beautiful weather, air down the tires, and go hit a trail. And we're going to talk about the tank, our experience, and answer some of the questions that you guys have asked us about our Long Range America fuel tank. I still love this Morphlate kit. We just hook up all 4 tires, open the valve, and they all air down at the same time. I can go do other stuff, take care of Gavin, whatever. And then we just watch the tire pressure right here from our TPMS sensors. And if you don't have this in your vehicle, it comes with a gauge that you can hook onto the valve block so that you can actually watch the tire pressure right on here. It really is a great setup. I want to start the video off with kind of how we got here, how we ended up ultimately deciding on the Long Range America fuel tank. So each year we do a number of different trips, some solo and some with groups, and a lot of the trips that we do, especially with groups, require us to carry extra fuel. We're in the backcountry for multiple days or multiple weeks at a time. Our Jeep has evolved quite a bit. We had a Smitty-built rear tire carrier that held 2 jerry cans on the back. It's a really functional tire carrier. I'm not knocking it at all. It's really nice, but it's super, super heavy. It's kind of cumbersome to open. The weight was the ultimate decision in getting rid of that. That tire carrier and bumper combo weighs about 240 pounds without the spare tire and without any jerry cans on it. And with the weight of a rooftop tent, a roof rack, a drawer system, and a fridge in the back, that's just a lot of extra weight hanging over the back of the rear axle, and it also brought down our departure angle quite a bit. So we switched to a lightweight mid-width rear bumper made by Quadratec. We're really happy with it. It's got a couple recovery points on it, and it only weighs, I don't know, maybe 70 pounds. And we got a TerraFlex heavy-duty hinge tire carrier, which keeps the spare tires close to the body as possible. And it really doesn't weigh much more than the factory tire carrier does. But we had to find a way to carry fuel then. We were coming up on a trip late 2019. We were going to be going to Parashot National Monument with a group from Arizona Backcountry Explorers. We knew from a prior trip that the group did that we would need a full 20 gallons of fuel extra to get to the destination that we had and make it back to civilization. So we had to figure out how do we carry an extra 20 gallons, and we opted to have our buddy build us a couple brackets that mounted to our roof rack and carried 4 jerry cans. 20 gallons of gas on the roof with a rooftop tent and a heavy roof rack will make you feel like you're gonna tip over at 5 or 10 degrees of off camber. We then upgraded to the Tough Stuff Alpha rooftop tent, and that takes up the majority of our Gobi rack up on top. So we had to figure out how are we now going to carry at least an extra 10 gallons of fuel. So I started looking around online and doing some research, and we found an option through Long Range America for an auxiliary fuel tank, and we found a couple different options for tire caddies that mount with your spare tire, and then of course your more obvious ones that you see more frequently, which would be like the Roto Packs, and mounting something like that either to our tire carrier or directly to the spare tire. We kind of ruled out the Roto Packs right away, just because our Jeep is always set up and ready to go. We don't daily drive it, and I don't want to be taking the cans on and off constantly, trying to keep them from dry rotting or leaking. The fuel caddy is the cheaper of the 2 options. They carry anywhere from like 10 to 12 gallons, depending which brand you go with. They're also made out of some sort of plastic, which gave us some concerns with longevity sitting out in the sun here in Arizona. But it also took us back to one of our original problems of having a lot of extra weight hanging off the back of our Jeep behind the rear axle. Some of the issues that you run into with that is more sag in the back because you have more weight back there. It's more stress on the hinges for the rear tire carrier. It lessens your departure angle because now your spare tire's sticking out further. And the convenience issue of needing to siphon gas out of it to fill your main tank. The Long Range America tank ties in to your factory system. When you fill up your gas tank, both the main tank and the auxiliary tank fill up at the same time. And then when your main tank runs low, you just push a button on your dash and it pumps the fuel from the auxiliary tank over to your main tank, and you have nearly a full tank of gas again. One of the big challenges when you're traveling with a family with young kids is frequent stops, and it just always seems to work out that when Gavin would fall asleep or finally take a nap on the road, that's when our gas would be low and we'd have to stop and get gas. And as soon as we stop, he would wake up from his nap and then he would just be cranky the rest of the day. Having the ability to fill up both tanks and double our range gave us the flexibility of being able to get gas when it's convenient for us, not because we have to. Sometimes we do still fill up the main tank, even if the auxiliary tank is full, just because it's more convenient. We're stopping for lunch. Sometimes we see that Gavin's fallen asleep, or we're going to be going through like a major city that we don't want to stop at, or we're getting into rush hour traffic on a highway somewhere and we just don't want to get off the freeway. We now have that extra range that we can go and keep pushing on. Of course, all of those benefits still carry over into the backcountry, where we don't need to worry about how much fuel do we have. Are we going to make it down this trail? Are we going to have enough to complete this trip? We're always going to have the fuel that we need. It was pretty obvious for us that this was going to be the best option, the most cohesive for the direction we wanted to take the Jeep and work out the best for our growing family and the kind of trips that we do. Let's talk a little bit about the build quality of the Long Range America tanks. Now, ours is an auxiliary tank. It's about 15.8 gallons. They do make full replacement tanks for different vehicles, and on some vehicles you have the option of replacement or an auxiliary tank. But these are all built in Australia. Each kit for each vehicle is specifically designed to meet US emission standards and bolt up to US vehicles. Some vehicles have different changes depending on where the vehicle's manufactured for, and so what bolts up in Australia might not be a direct bolt up in the US. Long Range America takes the time to modify these to fit perfectly on the US variants of these different vehicles so that it's a really streamlined installation. They can take a beating. I have a few friends that have these tanks, and some of them have definitely gashed them on some rocks, and the tanks are doing fine. They're holding up, they're taking the abuse. For normal wheeling, some technical trails here and there where you may hit it on a rock in a rock garden or something like that, it's gonna hold up to the abuse. The tanks come from the factory in a silver aluminum corrosion resistant coating. We opted to have ours bed lined on top of that. We wanted it to be more discreet. We wanted it to blend in with the Jeep a little bit more, and having it bedline black means that you don't really see it under the Jeep unless you're specifically looking for it. The other reason is in Arizona, all of our landscaping is rocks everywhere. The side of the highways, people's yards, neighborhoods, and of course your rocks while you're out on the trail. So we suffer a lot from rock chips here on our paint and in our windshields. And I figured something that's hanging underneath the Jeep is also going to get a lot of rocks kicked up at it, even just tiny stones. And over time, with the amount of driving that we do, I don't know that it would really negatively impact the tank in any way. But again, it was an investment and not something that I wanted to risk. I had mine done by Inyati Bedliners here in Phoenix. They did a great job. I'm really happy with how it turned out. They masked off all of the bracketry. It just covered basically the bottom and the sides of the tank, and we had no issues fitting this up for the installation. Let's talk a little bit about the installation of the tank. So when you get the tank, You can either have Long Range America ship it freight to a local freight pickup area. We had one here in Phoenix that we had them ship it to, and we weren't sure if we were going to do the install ourselves or have a shop do it. Alternatively, if you have a shop selected, Long Range will work with you to get the tank shipped directly to that shop, which may be a little bit easier if you know where the work's going to be done. I would recommend, if you're going to have a shop do it, get a couple different quotes. What you'll probably find is some shops are going to be more comfortable with these than other shops. Some shops may have done them in the past, and for other shops, this may be the first time doing it. Now, I think for most off-road shops, adding one of these tanks shouldn't be any challenge that they're not capable of doing, but if they haven't done one before, it might take them a little bit longer. We ultimately got 3 different quotes, and I went through my buddy Brian's shop, Sonoran Expedition Collective in Tucson, Arizona. The reason that I went with this shop, one, he's a friend of mine. I want to support local business, especially a friend. Brian has done a few of these tanks in the past, so he was really comfortable with it. He was also willing to take the time to allow me to make an installation video, and I was also able to be hands-on in the installation. It was really nice to have a good understanding of not only how the kit works, but how it's installed and all of the different working parts of it, so that if we do have an issue on a trip or somewhere down the road, hopefully it's something that I can address myself or troubleshoot and fix while we're on the road. In installing this at Brian's shop, we opted not to use a lift. We did everything on jack stands with just a floor jack and 2 jack stands. I wanted to show, and this may not go for every vehicle. Again, I don't know the installation on every single vehicle or every application. But at least on the Jeep Wrangler, this is something, if you're mechanically inclined and you have the time and the patience, that you can do in your driveway or in your garage on your own. I would not underestimate the installation though. You are completely removing your factory fill feeler assembly and you're modifying the evap system, and it's all going to be compliant. You're going to pass emissions after, but it's a lot of modification that you're making. Now, our tank was a full day installation. Brian told me that in the past he was able to get them done faster, but he wasn't putting up with somebody shoving a camera in every single thing that he was doing and making him redo things so that we could get the shot we wanted. And so my installation took a little bit longer. A shop can probably install this in a day, maybe 2 days just to button everything up, but I would plan on having the vehicle down for maybe 2 days to allow the shop time to get everything installed and test everything and make sure that it works properly. Questions that I get asked pretty commonly is, how does the tank work? It's really simple, and once you have it installed, it just feels so factory, which is one of my favorite things about the tank. You go to the gas station, you fill up your tank like normal. Whether you have an auxiliary tank or you have a replacement tank, when you start filling it up, it's gonna fill the tank's completely full. So in the case of our Jeep, 15.8 gallon auxiliary tank, put the fuel nozzle in the filler, start the pump, and it will fill both tanks at the same time. The fill filler assembly that you get with the kit basically tees off to go into the aux tank and into the factory tank. When both tanks are full, the pump clicks off, again, just like it would from the factory, and you're on your way. On your dashboard or wherever you choose to mount your switch for the auxiliary tank, you'll have a fuel indicator that'll show you in quarter tank increments all the way down to E. And what we do is when our main tank gets to about a quarter tank, we just push the button on the switch and it starts a 12-volt pump that pumps the fuel from the auxiliary tank over to the main tank. If we start that when we're at a quarter tank on the Jeep's main tank, it ultimately refills the tank to full. You can do this while you're driving, while you're parked. On our recent trip that we did up through Utah and Idaho, we did a lot of hiking on that trip. What I found was really convenient was when we would get to a trailhead, if the main tank was low, I would press the button and we would let the auxiliary tank refuel our main tank while we were out on our hike, and we would come back to a full tank again. It doesn't use a ton of power. I never really had any concerns of draining the battery or anything like that while using that pump with the Jeep off. We also did it a few times while we were at camp. If we got the main tank down low and we were setting up camp, I would just flip the switch and let the tank fill up as we went. Once the auxiliary tank is empty, the fuel indicator will flash a few times. It'll let you know that it's on E, and it'll continue to run the pump for about a minute, maybe 2 minutes, just until it knows that it has all the fuel out. And then once all the fuel is completely out, it automatically shuts the pump off. So again, when we would go to a trailhead to hike, I had no fears of the pump running continuously even after all the fuel transferred. It takes roughly maybe 15 to 20 minutes to transfer all the fuel from the aux tank over to the main tank. So if you're going down the highway, you can realistically, and we've done it before, wait until your gas light comes on, push the button, and it does transfer the fuel faster, at least in our case, faster than what our Jeep burns fuel. So we've never had an issue where we've ran out of gas in the main tank and had to stop to refill it from the aux tank. We would just wait for that gas light to come on or get down to a quarter tank, hit the button, and it would start transferring the fuel over. Now this is probably gonna vary whether you have an auxiliary tank or a replacement tank, but in the case of our auxiliary tank, our factory trip computer will tell us a guesstimated range of how many miles we have left on the tank. So it might say we have 300 miles when we fill up the tanks on full. Well, that's reading just off of the main tank, and that's gonna go down until the tank's empty. And then when we transfer the fuel from the aux tank over to the main tank to refill it, it's gonna reset that because it's seeing more fuel in the main tank. So on long road trips where we're planning a lot of time on the highway at 65, 70 miles an hour, it was really easy to gauge how far we could go. I would be driving and Abby would be looking at Google Maps, usually once we used up the main tank, and we would start planning, okay, when are we gonna stop? Are we gonna stop at a gas station to fill up, use the restrooms and eat, or are we gonna push on? And we were able to kind of judge, okay, we have an extra 250 miles here that we can go before we need to stop again. Let's stop when it's convenient for us. And that was really great. Let's talk about our experience with the long-range tank installed on our Jeep. We've traveled through Arizona, Utah, Idaho, New Mexico, all different elevations, all different terrains, all different conditions. I felt that this was a really good point to publish our review on the tank. I think the biggest benefits that the tank gave us was being solo. It gave us more confidence going remote and knowing that fuel wasn't an issue. We could drive long distances each day and cover a lot of ground to get to our next destination. Some days we were covering 300 to 400 miles, for example, going from Phoenix, Arizona up to Lake Powell, or the next day from Lake Powell to Salt Lake City, or from Salt Lake City up into Idaho. And so each day of our trip, when we would head on to a new destination and we were done exploring the area that we were in, we were really putting a lot of highway miles in. Very few times did we actually have to stop for fuel in between. And works just like the factory tank, that whether we're off-road or on-road, we don't have to mess with jerry cans. We don't have fuel spilling somewhere in a plastic container. We don't have weight hanging over the back of our Jeep, creating more sag on the vehicle. All the weight's below the vehicle. It's a low center of gravity, and we can drive down the road and have that fuel without stopping to siphon it or dump it in the tank. We actually used the fuel because it was easy to access. And when your fuel's not easy to access, you're less likely to use it and take advantage of the benefits of having it. One of the other things that we really like about having it is just the security of it. It's always a concern, and you always read stories of people having fuel cans stolen off their vehicle. Anytime that I had jerry cans on my vehicle, they were always in some sort of chain lock. And of course those can be defeated. With the long range tank, it's mounted underneath the vehicle. No one can get the fuel unless you actually siphoned it from the tank. It's actually a conversation that I had with a buddy of mine. If you tried to siphon the tank on our Jeep now and they're both full, you're probably only gonna get the main tank just because of the way the plumbing's routed. It would be really hard to get a siphon into the long range tank. Worst case scenario, if that ever did happen to us, and we still had fuel in the auxiliary tank, we could just pump that fuel over and we would be okay. So I have a few more Q&A items that I'll go over, and these are some questions that I maybe didn't directly go over in this review, but things that people have asked me in the past. With the added weight, do you need upgraded springs to support the weight? How much weight does it add? We already have a 3-inch TerraFlex Outback lift, which includes heavy rate springs to support the weight of an overland equipped vehicle essentially. But if you have factory suspension or a standard lift kit from most manufacturers, I think I can make a safe, educated guess. In the case of our Jeep Wrangler, our auxiliary tank dry weighs right about 50 pounds. It's roughly like 95, 96 pounds in fuel. So all in all, it's about 145 pounds that we've added to the Jeep. I would equate that to a average sized person, maybe a teenager or a smaller person. I don't know, 140, 150 pounds. If you were to put someone roughly that weight inside your vehicle, how much does that change your ride height? I don't think that this single modification is going to be something that's going to require you to get heavier rate springs. It's going to be this modification in addition to all of the other things that you may add and equip on your vehicle. 150 pounds for the auxiliary fuel tank, 150 or 160 pounds for your rooftop tent, 150 pounds for your drawer system and your fridge, 100 pounds or so for a steel bumper and tire carrier. It's all of those things added together that you're adding on your vehicle, I think that's going to ultimately make you need to upgrade your springs. But if the only thing you're doing is adding the tank, or if your ride height's fine now with how you have it set up and you're just adding the tank to it, I don't know that it's really going to have that big of an effect on you. What challenges getting it dialed in? The only issue that we had was my fault, and that came down to one of the wires running for the switch that I didn't ground properly, and so we were getting erratic fuel readings from the switch for the aux tank. Once I figured out what the issue was and we had a good connection, we haven't had any issues since. Does it affect ground clearance off-road? I think that question might be different depending on your application, depending on what vehicle you have. On the Jeep Wrangler, the Long Range America tank fits between the driver's side, the left frame rail, and the rear drive shaft, and your factory tank fits on the other side of the drive shaft between the passenger frame rail and the drive shaft. So it sits in a very similar configuration to what your factory fuel tank does. I will say the Long Range America tank hangs down slightly lower, not even an inch, I don't think. It hasn't been an issue for us. It's set so far back that where it does hang down is already kind of behind the left rear tire. So if we're coming up on, say, a large rock that we're about to drive over, and maybe it's even underneath where the tank would be, our tire will hit that rock before the tank will and lift the Jeep up over it. We haven't hit the tank a single time. 3-inch lift, 35-inch tires. And then the last question that I got is, what about other fuel options? Why the Long Range America tank? It was the ability to have something that worked just like the factory tank and not needing to use a siphon or spilling gas on yourself, and having something that was easy enough to use that you're actually going to use it when you're out exploring or out on a trip. Jerry cans and roto packs don't always have the best mounting solutions. You may be mounting them somewhere where you're putting weight in a bad spot on your vehicle, or they're more exposed to damage or theft. With the Long Range America tank, low center of gravity underneath the vehicle, don't even really know it's there. And when we fill up the tank, both tanks fill up. And when we need to use the tank, I just push a button on my dash and it transfers the fuel over. So what are my final thoughts on having the Long Range America fuel tank? I would absolutely buy this again in a heartbeat. If I was building a different vehicle or replacing the Jeep, which I don't plan on doing, the long range tank would probably be one of, if not the very first modifications that I would make. Regardless of whatever else we have on the Jeep, we would still go do the kind of trips that we do. Even when the Jeep was mostly stock, we still traveled from state to state. We still did off-grid trips. We still went off-roading, and we still used the Jeep to go do these explorations before we had a rooftop tent, before we had a fridge, before we had a lift kit and bigger tires, we still got out and had adventures. You don't need all that stuff to go out, but the long range fuel tank is something that is going to benefit you either way. You can still always use the extra fuel and it can be a benefit for you. And if your vehicle is stock, you probably don't have any provisions for mounting any other fuel source. So this would be a really good modification to start your Jeep with, or start whatever vehicle you have if you're going to be doing these types of adventures and trips, because you can use it whether the vehicle is stock or fully built. That wraps up our review of the Long Range America fuel tank on our 2015 JKU Clifford. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I hope this answered some of the questions that you might have on the long range tank and what's involved. If you have other questions that I didn't cover in this video, please leave those in the comments below. I'll try to answer all the questions that you might have. If this video helped you, please give us a thumbs up. And if you enjoy our content, please consider subscribing. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you on the trail.